Please be warned. Inspired by a true story, deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence, and is intended for a mature audience.
June 1983. A young woman gets into a car expecting a simple exchange of sex for money. Instead, her horrific ordeal and fight for survival leads to the capture of Alaska's most notorious serial killer, known as the Butcher Baker. In 2013, Nicolas Cage and John Cusack reunite, determined to take on this tale and pay respect to the victims. It turns out, nowhere is safe from predators, because the frozen ground was indeed inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is Inspired by a True Story, a podcast devoted to keeping artists honest, and we are going to discuss the overall details of the actual crimes of the frozen ground, then review the film on its own, how much of that is true, and how much was Hollywood magic. You can always share your thoughts on this episode or suggest a film by emailing us, inspired@thehollywoodoutsiders.com. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and website. Joining me today are my fellow film critics and true crime devotees, John Davenport.
Hey, buddy.
And Amanda Sink will be absent the next 2 episodes for personal reasons, but she will be back. Joining us in her stead is a longtime Hollywood Outsider film critic, as well as a man with a weirdly personal connection to this case, and someone who actually sat down across from Robert Hansen, a.k.a. the Butcher Baker, which we'll share details of that conversation a bit later, Mr. Brian Williams.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Did you ever think this would come back? Like this random day you spent with Robert Hansen?
Yeah, it wasn't that long, but yeah, it was. It was just not something that ever. Yeah, just one of those things I just never really thought much about. It was just something to do during during a lot of downtime.
With the Coast Guard, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We got to hold it, right? We got to tease that. You got to hold on to that story until we get there.
I can't wait.
As always, we'll share the show on your social media outlets if you could, and with your friends. And you can find all of our podcasts at thehollywoodoutsider.com. This is a movie I had not seen before. I'm sure I heard of it, but I am very surprised that it reunites 2 of the 3 from Con Air, and I knew very little about this film. Does that surprise you guys that you would think this would have gotten a little bit more fanfare when it was released?
I see it falling through the cracks, but I'm surprised it really didn't get on the Hollywood Outsider radar.
Yeah, when this came out, you were still on the Hollywood Outsider.
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew of its existence a few years ago or so, but I don't think I ever really watched it.
You're actually the one that told me about the movie to begin with. I'll be honest. I did not even know it was a thing.
As far as the movie's concerned, it came out during a period of time in which, one, you have Nicolas Cage, who's trying to pay off tax debt like crazy. So he's just throwing out movie after movie of questionable quality. And then 2, this happened right at the beginning of the comic book movie, what do you want? Proliferation of the media. So
I think explosion works.
Explosion
works too.
Concussion, whatever you want to call it, it happened. And so movies like this fell through the crack rather regularly.
What I find funny, Nicolas Cage is, I think Tarantino said it best once, where he said, I've never seen an actor, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, I don't remember the exact quote. I've never seen an actor who's made a more successful career off being miscast in my entire life. And I think that stands true, because if you really think about it, so many of the roles like he is miscast for, and he just makes the absolute best out of everything anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, he's everything from some sort of big game cat hunter to a state trooper.
Yeah.
To whatever else. Just give it to him. He'll make it work.
I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago about Nicolas Cage, and she was telling me how she was frustrated with Hollywood, or had been frustrated with Hollywood for years, for trying to make Nicolas Cage a sex symbol. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? And then I look at everything and I'm like, no, maybe she's right.
I mean, he was sexy man for a long time. I don't know what the point is there. You know, I mean, he was in pretty good shape, and, you know, he looked great with a mullet. So.
This is true.
Well, as of this recording, The Frozen Ground is available to rent via streaming at all the usual online platforms, but that's always subject to change. And The Frozen Ground follows a detective played by Nicolas Cage who is looking into an attack reported by the young Cindy Paulson, who was played by Vanessa Hudgens, who I didn't even know was in this film. And the elusive serial killer that was the one to attack her was, of course, Robert Hansen, played by John Cusack. Weird to see John Cusack pulling up here as a serial killer. I don't know. It was kind of surprising. New episodes are released every 2 weeks. Can be found wherever you listen to podcasts or at thehollywoodoutsider.com. You can hear episodes early by supporting the show at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsider. Are you guys ready to talk about the details behind The Frozen Ground, the truth behind the murders?
Let's do it.
Yep.
Wait, did that sound too excited? Let's do it.
Yeah, I was a little uncomfortable. I mean, Brian's over here sounding pretty normal, like, sure, let's dive into it. And you're over here going, I can't wait to hear about this one.
Bring it on. He's clapping. He's doing the Arsenio Hall, you know.
All right, so film and true crime fans alike are always debating how true their true crime is. So grab a parka and bundle up. We're heading back to Alaska to discover the truth behind The Frozen Ground. Robert Christian Hansen was born on February 15th, 1939 in Esterville, Iowa, to Christian and Edna Hansen. Robert was the oldest of 2 children, and he was known to be a bit of a loner growing up. He was shy, he had acne so horrible it permanently scarred his face, and he had a bit of a stutter. As he was often without friends, he took to hunting and archery to pass the time, preferring to stalk wildlife rather than meet and greet with his fellow students. Robert's father, Christian, was a baker, and a rather accomplished one, as he had his own bakery. This skill he passed down to Robert, who became quite adept at baking on his own. The Hansen family bounced around quite a bit, moving from Iowa to California for a few years, but eventually returned back to Iowa and laid roots in the town of Pocahontas. Robert later enlisted in the Army and served a short stint before being discharged a year later. He married and even worked as a drill instructor at a police academy for some time. Unfortunately, his lonely youth continued to fester, simmering under the guise of a normal, everyday man. Which led to Hansen's first arrest on December 7th, 1960, where he was charged with arson for burning down a Pocahontas school garage. He was thought to have done this as a retaliation for the humiliity he endured while a student there. This was also the beginning of a horrific change in Robert, one where he exacted sadistic acts on others and somehow justified them in his mind, as well, justified. It was also during this 36-month prison sentence that Hansen was first diagnosed with schizophrenia, an infantile personality, and manic depression. He was essentially an angry child who had a penchant for vengeance against those he deemed as aggressors. Well, his first wife divorced him, and after more arrests for theft, Robert Hansen married Darla Marie Heinrichsen in 1963. They moved to Anchorage, Alaska in 1967. Robert could become a skilled hunter here, with the surrounding wildlife varied in types. And his wife Darla would frequently return to the lower 48 states with their 2 children in tow to visit family, especially in the summer months. Darla had her own job, tutoring learning disabled children, and the couple rarely merged funds together. They were married, but often separate. In December 1971, Robert Hansen was arrested 2 times, once for abducting and attempting to rape a woman, and then for raping a prostitute. The first woman, he followed home, showed up at her door, and then attempted to rape her. Later, he picked up the prostitute, learning that the following approach wasn't working, and did rape her. He copped to assault with a deadly weapon on the first victim, and a plea deal on the second that led to a sentence of 5 years. Hansen served a whopping 6 months for 2 incidents of sexual violence before getting work release at a halfway house. 5 years later, he pleaded guilty to larceny for stealing a chainsaw. The reason being, he just wanted to see if he could get away with it. Again, he received 5 years and was also required to receive treatment for bipolar disorder. The Alaska Supreme Court later reduced his sentence to time served. There are reports that claim Robert Hansen's first victim was 18-year-old Celia Van Zanten, as she was kidnapped 3 days after the second attack Hansen led. She was abducted on December 22nd and found frozen to death on December 25th. Though similar, there is no proof of this that we could find, and Hansen himself denied this even after confessing to much worse. According to the Anchorage Daily News, and by his own admission in later years, Robert Hansen began murdering roughly in 1972. Ergo, after he was released 4.5 years early on those first 2 rape charges. While he could not remember her name, Robert believed his first victim was a topless dancer or a prostitute. He recalled pulling a gun on her and then switching to stabbing her to death. Her remains were eventually found, but her identity remains unknown. As he became more respectable in the community, weaponizing his role as a local baker that was seemingly well-liked, Robert Hansen became more proficient as a serial killer. He established a clear pattern. He would pick up or kidnap an unsuspecting prostitute or stripper, someone he deemed as lesser valued and would not be missed. He then handcuffed and chained them in a soundproof room at his own home, typically when his wife and children were out of town. He would rape these victims at gunpoint repeatedly. When he tired of them, or felt it was time to dispose of them, or was in a rush because his family was on their way home, he would then proceed to his private plane and fly his victims to a random, isolated area. What came next was even more monstrous than what came before. Robert Hansen would release his victims, young women, into the wild. They were already at this point beaten, ravaged, raped, humiliated, and deprived of necessities for days. They were tired, they were hungry, and they were scared. Hansen would force them to run, and then he would stalk and kill them like wild animals. Like game. Like a piece of meat. Then, Hansen would do what often serial killers do and take a piece of memorabilia, dispose of the body as best he could, and fly back to Anchorage as if nothing had ever happened. This is what his decade-plus rampage as a serial killer consisted of. Waiting for his family to leave their home, identifying his next victim, stalking her, kidnapping her, abusing her, raping her, flying her out to a secluded location, and then forcing this tired, beaten, violated woman to attempt her own escape, to somehow think she might get away. To which Robert Hansen, an established hunter with decades of experience, would then stalk and kill this woman, extinguishing her from the universe. And then, he went back to baking bread. Thankfully, this all began crashing down upon Hansen beginning on June 13th, 1983. Hansen pulled up to Cindy Paulson, a young girl all of 17 years old. He offered her $200 for oral sex, to which she agreed. When Cindy got into his vehicle, Hansen's usual scenario took over. Kidnapping at the end of a gun, chaining Cindy by her neck to a post, beating and raping her, and then he even took a nap. As if this was a somehow relaxing endeavor. When he woke up from slumberland, Hansen drove Cindy out to Merrill Field, and was preparing to fly her out to his cabin on his Piper PA-18 Super Cub. And when Hansen was distracted, Cindy, she made a break for it. Cindy bolted from the car, intentionally leaving her blue sneakers behind as evidence to be used later, and ran as fast as she could down 6th Avenue. Hansen chased after her, but Cindy flagged down a truck who took her to the Mush Inn. Cindy begged the clerk to contact her boyfriend, but instead he called the police to report the incident. They arrived to find Cindy holed up in a room, handcuffed, and still alone. Officer Greg Baker took Cindy in for treatment, including a rape kit, and Cindy filed a report with the Anchorage Police Department. Cindy described Hansen, even directing Officer Greg Baker to the airport and providing information leading to identifying Hansen's plane. And he was finally brought in for questioning. Hansen, as typical of his MO, blamed the situation on Cindy, stating she threatened to blackmail him once she knew he was such an upstanding member of the community. The police somehow believed Hansen, despite multiple convictions for similar offenses. Hansen seemed like a simpleton, not a sadistic rapist, and he had what we later would learn was a bullshit alibi from his friend John Henning, and that persuaded police to release Hansen. Hansen was free, and Cindy was awarded no justice, and only Officer Baker seemed to believe her story thoroughly. That is, until Alaska State Trooper Detective Glenn Flothy arrived on the scene. Flothy was investigating several dead women's bodies located in Anchorage and Seward areas, known then as the Knik River murders. The first of these bodies was Eklutna Annie, who was found dead and stabbed in the back, and whose remains have still never been identified. Then Joanna Messina, Sherry Morrow. The bodies kept piling up. Flothy was considered a sharp, good-natured detective who stood hard by the facts. Walter Gilmore, who was also once an Alaska State Trooper and co-author with Leland Hale on the book Butcher Baker, told these events in that book. Quote, 5 days after the second body was found on the Knik, Lieutenant Bob Gent of the Alaska State Troopers assigned Sergeant Glenn Flothy to the Knik River murders. At that time, he'd been working on 17 other homicides. He'd solved all except one of them, but most still needed follow-up. That meant Flothy was stuck shepherding his cases to the judicial system. Gent changed all that. Flothy was to work full-time on the Knik cases. Gilmore also said of Flothy, "We put all the asshole cops on the missing dancers case and they didn't solve it. We figured it was time to try the nice guy." And solve it, Flothy definitely did. Flothy contacted the FBI for help and received a profile from Special Agent John Douglas based on the 3 bodies. They knew these bodies were dumped in difficult-to-reach locales, so they likely had access to a plane. Then you factor in an experienced hunter with self-esteem issues and possibly a stutter. Well, all that led back to Robert Hansen, thanks to Cindy Paulson's identification. That's right, the one no one in law enforcement except Greg Baker took really seriously. Once they secured a warrant on October 27, 1983, police discovered a hidden attic which held jewelry from Hansen's victims and a .223 caliber Mini-14 semi-automatic rifle, which was a known murder weapon. Also, most importantly, an aeronautical chart with dozens of tiny X marks on it, located behind Hansen's headboard. As they say, X marks the spot, and several of these X's were exactly where bodies were found. Ruh-roh. Hansen, of course, denied the accusations as long as he could, but eventually he started to unravel. And as he did so, he continued to blame the women. It was their fault he raped and murdered them the way that he did. And as each piece of evidence arrived, Hansen continued to confess, even to committing a series of attacks and rapes outside of the murders, claiming that number to be in the dozens beginning in 1971. But those women were not all sex workers. But they were all young women, though Hansen did not confess to any that were not sex workers. At the beginning of their lives, and then they met the Butcher Baker of Alaska. All told, Robert Hansen claimed to have murdered 17 women, but police attribute that number higher to 21 potential victims. And Hansen was actually only officially charged with 4 murders: Sherry Morrow, Joanna Messina, Eklutna Annie, and Paula Golding, plus the kidnapping and rape of Sidney Paulson. Hansen denied many murders, confining all of his murders to prostitutes or strippers, because he refused to confess to anyone who was not in those professions. Hansen's wife, Darla, was a gentle, deeply religious woman. Some church members stated she believed God talked to her, and she believed she could help Robert with all these inner demons. And it turns out, she could not. While we were speaking about Darla, we should note that we try to keep spouses out of these details as much as possible, and family in general, as often they are unwitting victims in all of this. This relationship was toxic and tortured in many ways, though she stuck with him throughout many of his early crimes. Darla did allude to knowing Robert had a dark side, but that she didn't believe it extended past seeing prostitutes in the late hours of the night. She claimed to have no idea of the monster her husband was, nor of the soundproof room and what occurred there. As for Hansen's motives, he himself stated that it was because women rejected him his entire life, and he felt his excessive acne and stuttering problem was a curse. He stated, as reported by the New York Daily News, that, quote, "Going back in my life, I was, I guess, what you might call very frustrated. I would see my friends and so forth, going out on dates and so forth, and had a tremendous desire to do the same thing. From the scars and so forth on my face, you can probably see. I could see why girls wouldn't want to get close to me. During my junior high or high school days, I could not control my speech at all. I was always so embarrassed and upset with it, from people making fun of me, that I hated the word school." In February 1984, Robert Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison, plus life without parole. In the end, he did help authorities search for his own victims, but only 12 were ever located. Robert Hansen died on August 21st, 2014, at the age of 75, in prison. Robert Hansen was scarred due to his excessive acne, and he did suffer from a stuttering problem that he later mostly overcame. His life as a loner in his youth haunted him. His bullies became his fuel. At least that is what he chose to believe and blame for his manipulative and vicious actions. Nothing was ever his fault. It was always due to someone else. No true responsibility, even among his confessions. But the facts are clear. Robert Hansen was a serial rapist and murderer. However his character was molded is a moot point. We've all had struggles or dealt with adversity. You, me, everyone. We've all wanted to avenge a bully or someone who slighted us in our lives. But we persevere. What we do not do is kidnap, beat, and assault innocent women. And regardless of what you think of their profession, these are innocent women who were then stalked and hunted like deer in a forest preserve, as though they were nothing more than entertainment for his amusement. Despite a documented history of violence, authorities gave him a pass of sorts, choosing to see the lie instead of the truth. Robert Hansen presented himself as kind and decent, despite continued convictions for violence. He was a quiet baker who kept to himself with a seemingly loving wife and doting children. At least that's what he wanted his friends to think, because inside, he was a monster, constantly fighting to be set free. He trained for years, perfecting his methods of murder to become the worst bully imaginable, preying on the wounded in the most desolate, inescapable place on Earth. In his words, it gave him this quote-unquote sexual blow-up charge to target those weaker than him. He said, quote, I wanted to control them, and any resistance made him want to punish them more. And this wannabe, tough, sleek, smarter than anyone hunter was brought down by a young 17-year-old girl who refused to play his game. Cindy Paulson knew her life was worth way more than the amount Robert Hansen valued it at. And for that, he finally paid the ultimate price.
One of the things that I find the most interesting is just how much of a hero Cindy Paulson is in this story. Because if she didn't fight for her life and fight for to remember every detail she possibly could when she escaped, we don't find Robert Paulson. And then the next step, there's an interview with Officer Greg Baker, where Greg Baker is talking about how he was the only one of that police department who was believing her. And when he was taking her to the hospital for her SA testing, he drove her by the airport to figure out which plane it was that she was looking at before she escaped. And if it wasn't for her being able to point at the plane, again, they don't have that beginning of that trail to Robert Paulson.
It's Robert Hansen, not Paulson.
Yeah, you're right. Robert Hansen.
Yeah.
That's twice. I let the first one go, but I had to stop you the second time.
I don't have it written down as Robert Paulson. And anyhow, Robert Hansen, that's how they start the case, is that's how they know. But the police department still doesn't believe Cindy or even Officer Baker.
Generally speaking, are you going to take the word of a prostitute? I mean, how much credibility are you going to give it 40 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I get that's the problem, right?
I mean, the prostitute targets, the strippers, the targets, is almost the perfect victim.
Because their credibility is stretched.
The credibility, nobody believes them. They're looked down as being lesser humans than lesser people, lesser class. Nobody looks at them. Nobody pays them much attention. The times that they're active are in the nighttime, where most of the population is not out and about. Obviously, enough of people are, because those are still popular, very popular professions. Yeah. Thousands of years later,
still very much in action.
Yeah, exactly. So again, they're transient. They move around. There's hundreds of things that could happen to them. So nobody takes the time to get to know them. You're just not looked at as a credible witness. And so when you factor in the drug use that's prevalent in that society, so you got somebody who comes in, they're frantic, maybe they're on something. There's more working against that person, unfortunately, than just taking them at their word. And it's not a justification for their actions, but luckily the one cop saw through it and saw how traumatized she really was and really believed her and pushed forward.
What I find sad, tragic, not out of the scope of this case, is that that's still a thing. Right. That's still a thing. You very much could talk to someone now and say the same story, and they would still probably lean toward the Baker just off their gut. Right. Because, well, there are many people that still to this day believe that a prostitute or a sex worker or a dancer, quote unquote, put themselves in that situation, which is a totally unfair element. Right. It doesn't matter if she agreed to oral sex or not. She still was assaulted. She still was kidnapped. She still was about to be, like, these are all things that happen. And he had a history of it. And I still believe in this day and age, they still would question her credibility in that scenario.
Oh, yeah.
The thing that makes this even worse is that he had made so many good friends by being this baker in this town that he was able to go to his friends and say, hey, there's going to be people showing up that will be questioning whether or not I did this thing to this hooker. Can you cover for me? And people would cover for him on the regular.
Yeah, which is insane. It's
nuts. Right. because they're totally just covering for him because they're sex workers, because they look at them as just hookers or any of those other nasty things you want to call them. That's the only reason that they're getting his back, because he can't possibly be a terrible person. He's a baker. He makes all my cakes. It's crazy.
I mean, I'm a pretty loyal friend, but I think somebody came to me and said, this young woman's going to come, she was a prostitute and she's going to accuse me of trying to kidnap and murder her in the middle of the woods. I'm probably staying out of this completely. I mean, look, we're bros, but no. No's before bros. That's what I'm going with here. It just does not make sense to me. And I'll tell you one thing, I've already got, it doesn't matter what I think, but I've already got a personal view on hunting. I'm not a big fan. This does nothing to encourage me to change that view. That's all I'm going to say. All this does is kind of reinforces how I already kind of look at hunting, which is you're stalking and killing prey without. It's not fair. It's not a fair contest, all right? You're trying to make this like, oh, it's really, I'm hunting. No, you're not. I mean, you're creating the parameters. You're creating an inescapable event.
Yeah, it's crazy, like the progression of his growth when he hits Alaska, because he gets to Alaska, he makes a few friends, he starts getting into bow hunting, and as he's getting into bow hunting, it turns out that he is amazing at bow hunting. And then he goes from being amazing at bow hunting that he has to keep going more and more into bigger and bigger game to finally get the high that he's looking for. But the reason why he loved bow hunting to start was because he had to be within 20 feet for a bow to be effective. You have to be within 20 feet of the prey for it to be effective. And so that's why.
Probably a little further than that. That's pretty.
Yeah. You mean 20 yards? 20 yards makes more
probably
sense.
20 yards is more reasonable. Still fairly close, yeah.
I mean, those were his words, is that you have to be within 20 and you use your metric of measurement for whatever it is, but that's still pretty close. I mean,
if you're going to quote him, you should probably know what the quote is.
If they're his words, it sounds.
Make sure you know if it's yards, John. Damn it.
Kind of like.
Anywho, I don't know, 20 feet and 20 yards. That's how different is that?
40 feet, actually.
Quite a chunk.
40 feet. It's 3 times the length of the original number, the original metric.
Is it really? Because like my depth perception sucks, so I can't tell the difference.
Oh that's a measurement.
It's not. You're not looking. We don't have a chart here for you to look at 60 yards or 60 feet versus 20 feet.
All right, it doesn't matter. He still has to be so damn close to the thing he's trying to kill, and that's where he got the high from, and that's how he progressed. Okay, that's what
matters. It does matter.
It matters. 20 feet away, he could tap the doll sheep on the shoulder just about and say, hey, I'm about to kill you. 20 yards, he's got to actually hit it with something.
You do have to be close for bow hunting. That is a fact.
Right.
I'm sure glad you're not deciding what house I should buy and how big those rooms are for my furniture, because the measurements would matter. Quite a bit. And if I had 20 yards of space.
It's 12 feet or 20. That wall is 20 yards long. Sorry.
That is an outside. That's a backyard. Lanai,
basement, same thing. Whatever.
Just so everybody knows, we did verify it is 20 yards. What is the thought on this? I mean, I know people always love to blame families, like, how could you not know this was going on in your own home and everything else? But they were gone usually. And obviously this is a guy who learned to cover his tracks quite a bit. I just think it's insane that he did so much of this in his own home. I mean, he did a lot of this in his own home before he flew them out to other locations. That's just wild to me.
Again, as a baker, you have really, really early hours. You're probably at the bakery 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe earlier, because you're having things ready by 6 o'clock. People start coming through for donuts and croissants.
I'm sorry, you're asking me else? Because I would not know.
Yeah, those kinds of places. Yeah, you're because you're sending stuff out to other businesses. You're sending stuff. They've got to have the stuff on the shelf. The fresh bread for the morning for whatever other restaurants, other maybe stores like grocery stores, that kind of those kinds of things. You've got people that come by, getting their Danish and coffee before they go to work. They've got to, so the place is open early. He's got to be there. I mean, every baker is starting work at like 4 o'clock in the morning, if not sooner. So I think his opportunities to be alone and to help logistically move these girls around was fairly easy. Although it is, to have that going on under the same house as, as your spouse and kids, and none of them have an idea what's going on is pretty amazing. I don't know how you pull that off. Like, how does the wife not know what's this door? Why is it always locked?
Well, at some point that she didn't have an easy life with him, so at some point she just probably got to a level at which I'm just going to accept whatever it is, and I'm going to close my eyes to whatever's going on so that I can keep on living. The thing, yeah, you're right. The thing about a baker is that their lifestyle is they're usually cooking as of 2-3 o'clock in the morning from whenever the shop open, just to make sure they have stock to be able to sell for everything. So they live a lifestyle in which he can. It would make sense for him to, even if his family was home, go out, hit the strip clubs, hit the corners. And it's just an easily explainable thing of, hey, I had to go to the bakery. Nobody would question it. It just makes sense for what he was doing.
What I find interesting is that once he's caught, once he's confessed and everything, he gave several interviews, and there are many recordings of him where he seems very cavalier almost with what he's done, in terms of he's accepted it. It is what it is. And here's what I did. Here's why I did it. And he speaks of it like he's just repeating the story like we would of what happened on Friday night when we went out and met with friends. He's very casual, very just laid back about his own approach.
None of it's his fault.
He didn't just stalk someone. Yes, he never really takes responsibility for it.
Yeah, no, it only happened because she said something nasty to him. It only happened because she tried to run away. It only happened because she hit him. It only happened because whatever it was that person who I took out of their situation and put them in a different situation that they had no control over. It's their fault, not mine, because I'm just doing the Lord's work. I'm just doing the right thing by doing this to them. That's very much his attitude. And he's very snivelly. He's very like, He sounds like somebody who's fighting to be seen as this hero figure. And he's very much trying to make himself bigger than he really is. But yet, especially listening to the tapes, to me in my mind, I hear somebody who's folded over on themselves. Their body language is completely weakened. There's no standing up in pride. There's no any of those things, because that's what his voice sounds like. It was fascinating to hear the dichotomy of those two things. To hear the words he's saying, but hear the way he's saying it is weird.
Which brings me to the story that we talked around at the beginning. So, Brian, paint the picture. You're in Alaska. Just take us through the story. Like, how do you end up talking to Robert Hansen? And please don't elaborate. Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you, Brian.
Yeah. It's really, again, it's something I've never really thought too much about. If I ever heard the name come up, I was like, oh yeah, that guy, kind of a thing. I was in the Coast Guard at the time. I was stationed in Alaska, a little town called Homer, Alaska, which is on the Kenai Peninsula, which Seward is on. Mm-hmm. The town of Seward is on the Kenai Peninsula as well. We were on a patrol. It was only supposed to be a 7-day patrol. There was a book being passed around about this serial killer who was stalking and killing these prostitutes and strippers and stuff, and the book was being passed around quite a bit. I never even read the book, but I've heard so many other conversations standing watch with all these people. Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like you read it yourself.
I feel like I read it. Yeah, it was like listening to an audiobook almost. So we accidentally caught a crab pot in our propellers.
Okay.
Which bent them down way further than were usable. Okay. So we had to do an emergency dry dock. The only place we could get into was in Seward, Alaska. So we made our way there. We were there for 3 weeks getting repairs done. we weren't prepared for this. It was only supposed to be about a week long. So, we didn't have many clothes to wear, that kind of stuff. But one of the guys had the idea, said, hey, look, this guy in this book is here in prison.
I'm not trying to stop your story, but this is the kind of thing that only frickin' young, dumb men come up with.
Yeah, exactly.
With too much time on your hands.
Guess what? Yeah, exactly. And anyway, somebody had the idea. Let's go see if we can meet him.
Because he was he kind of a celebrity to them at that point in terms of
to them, yeah,
not in celebration
them,
necessarily,
yes.
But because they knew so much about him at that point.
And we're right here. Like we are oddly just. It's not like we would go looking for this guy, tracking him down or nothing. It says it right here in the book. He's at this prison. Okay, we are here. Where's this at? Oh, it's a few miles out this way. Okay. Hey, y'all, I got an idea. Let's go see if we can talk, if we can meet him. One of the guys calls, says, sure, you can come visit, but here's the thing. You can't, they give us a list of stuff we couldn't wear,
for safety,
anything metal.
Sure.
Yeah. All that stuff for safety reasons. So we had to wear our dress uniforms, which is we look like bus drivers with our blue jackets and blue pants, and we couldn't wear any of our nameplates or insignias or any of that stuff. So it really looked weird.
This is the early 90s then, right?
Yeah, this is 92. Okay. So this is 92. I'm about 18, 19 years old. And again, just don't really, I'm just young and naive. Just don't really know the gravity of who I'm about to go meet. So we go, they check us, they run down the, follow this guy, go here, don't stray, don't, all that stuff. And and then so we go to this room. It's kind of room that had, some tables and stuff in it. And they brought him in and he was pleasant. He was charming in a reserved way. Like he was curious about us. Why would y'all want to come see? Why would you want to come here and visit? I appreciate y'all coming. It's nice to talk to somebody different, kind of a thing.
Does he approve this? Is like he has to approve it to visit with people, and I assume he's just happy to have a visitor at that point, right?
Yeah, they asked permission. That was one of the things. Yeah, they're like, well, yeah, we'll ask him, and then one of the guys, I guess he had to call back to check to see, hey, has this been approved or been okayed or whatever? So yeah. He approved it, and I mean we were there for maybe 30 minutes or so. It wasn't a long visit. Wasn't like wasn't a whole lot of interrogation type questionings. It was just more casual. Thanks for appreciate y'all coming by. Talked to the guards a little bit. The guards all liked him. The couple that we talked to, they liked him. They said he's got a decent reputation with everybody. He was working in the kitchen, which was, I guess, made a lot of sense since he's had a lot of experience with baking and stuff.
You can kind of see how, and to some degree, how when this is all going down, the police took to him, in terms of they liked him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say is that, most of the focus is about the horrible stuff he did, and rightfully so. But there's that other side of it, the public perception of him. Mm-hmm. Again, he had to meet a woman and woo her and, convince her to marry him and have kids.
Yeah.
They had kids and he's got to be a good dad. He's an upstanding member of the community. He's a fairly successful business owner. And they show that briefly. That's one of the things I kind of wish they would have done in the movie was they kind of maybe show him a little bit more, create a little bit more of a, I guess, of showing how popular he really was, because I think that's just a huge part of how he got away with stuff. But yeah, it was again, it was just as far as the meeting, it was fairly brief and just something I just never really thought twice about. It was just an adventure. That's really all it was. Was just like, we're here, this guy's here. Let's go see if we can. Let's go see if we can say hey.
And you talk about his public face and. As you're talking to him, basically, because I'm sure he has his public face on at all times, right? Except when those moments when he loses it, right? So you can completely not see the monster that's there. I would assume. He just seemed like a pretty regular guy, or were there moments where you could see it?
I mean, again, I'm 19 years old. I don't have the context of life that I do at this age, but no, I mean, I didn't see him as a serial killer murderer. I just saw him as, a guy that was in prison who was nice enough to let 4 knuckleheads come in and kill a little bit. Well, that's a bad choice of words. Waste a little bit of his time. So,
I'm sorry to laugh at that
one.
Can I ask you, like, what was the conversation about? Like, what was it? Just pleasantries, or did they actually start asking him about aspects of the case, or why he did what he did, etc.?
Yeah, one of the guys asked him about the map.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would you, if you didn't really kind of plan on going back there, why would you hang on to the map? That seems to be the one thing that really kind of drew everything together. And he didn't really answer. He kind of evaded it. It was just kind of like, it was just a map, and I had, just had these marks, and I just kind of it was just a way of keeping track, and that was really kind of about it. Didn't really get into, nobody was asking him stuff like, what pushed you to this point, or what was your childhood like to make you this way, or anything like that. Nothing like that. It was just more of, what's your days like? Do you think you'll ever get out of here? Do you, all that, just kind of surface level type stuff.
Spoiler alert, he did not.
He did not. No, he did not.
Nope.
Funny enough, he did reach out to the director of The Frozen Ground and tried to be a part of it, but was declined because the director actually wanted to keep it from the victim's perspective.
Well, I think he did manage to do that for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, because he didn't want to, come across it any way of glorifying Robert Hansen. So, which I thought was pretty cool move.
It was. Any final thoughts on meeting Robert Hansen in terms of perceptions or anything that stood with you after you met him?
I mean, not really. It's just, like I said, to me, it's not something I've ever really thought about. It's just, to me, it was an adventure. It was just kind of like, okay, let's go to this prison. I've never been to prison. Don't want to ever go to prison after being in there. However, if there is a prison that I can pick, it would probably be that one. Because
beautiful scenery.
If I get to look out the beautiful scenery. If I got to look out a small little window for the rest of my life, then that's some pretty good scenery to check out.
Now, lastly, 50-plus-year-old Brian, if you could go back to that moment, would you have handled that completely different, or you feel like you probably would have?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Would you have been? How would you handle it differently? I'm curious, because that is something that I would have a lot of self-reflection about. Like, man, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have asked this. I wish I would have done this.
Right. If I could go back, I would have made a point to read the book.
That helps. Yeah.
So I would have had more ammo for questions, or more inspiration for questions. I don't know how specific I would get with him, but there would definitely be some, I guess, maybe psychology inspired or direction questions. Some of the what were you thinking during these certain points while you're digging a hole, or while you're at any point during the process, do you have second thoughts? What were you feeling when you're handcuffing somebody to,
Yeah, at some point, do you realize what you're doing?
Because it's a long time between kidnapping them, abducting them, securing them down in a basement, doing the horrible stuff you do, taking the person out, transporting them to a plane, taking them out to the woods in the middle of nowhere, hunting them, murdering, digging holes, burying, getting back. At some point, does anything in your brain go, God, maybe this isn't such a good idea?
Yeah. Or maybe I'm an awful person, or maybe I should let this girl go, or I should turn myself in. Those are the kinds of things I would want to know. Like, do you have any self-reflection? Do you have any empathy? Or are you just a complete and total sociopath?
Yeah, I would definitely lean towards the latter there.
Yeah, well, it sure seems that way, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, from some of the interviews, again, he's got to be complete and total sociopath.
Segueing to the movie, we already talked about it a little bit. As a standalone film, I didn't know much about this case when I'm watching the movie, and I will say, like, it's not a bad film. I enjoyed it. It was entertaining enough. I do think it's missing big chunks to really sell it. I think this could have been a very riveting, almost Silence of the Lambs type film if they had done it correctly in many respects.
I think if you made that now, it would be a 3-part series on Netflix.
Oh, sure. Oh, it'd be great.
Yeah.
It'd be great. And adding the additional aspects to Sidney Paulson's scenario was a horrible choice. Like this whole hiring a hitman to go after her so that there's this added third act of just
with tension and suspense to it.
And it's just like, what were you thinking? You didn't need it. We didn't need any of that. None of it.
No.
So that was sad.
Yeah, that was my one gripe about the movie, is really that portion of it. If you ask me, the movie kind of does Cindy wrong. When police were finally working with her, she was, according to the records, she was really happy to be working with them. She did everything she could. She wasn't the kind of person to be portrayed as the mess that she was portrayed as in the movie. Not that Vanessa Hudgens didn't do a good job. It's just they did her wrong in so many ways.
Is this Cindy Hansen? Is this?
That's funny.
Nice.
Way to bring it back.
Nice.
Way to bring it.
Just want to make sure I get my people straight.
What do we think about Nick Cage here? I never, ever am unhappy to see Nick Cage in a role. I don't care how good or bad the movie is. He always makes it worth watching, and this is no exception.
This is the least unhinged I've ever seen him, I think.
Yeah, he's definitely restrained.
Yeah. There's no portion of like, I just want to find some bombs. Like, I don't, like, none of that happens.
I gotta be perfectly honest. A big portion of me wishes the roles were reversed here, because the more excitable moments, the more energetic moments John Cusack gets, and I don't think he quite nails it. I think Cusack would have. You would have seen someone who is calm and subdued, and then when they get frustrated and very angry, I think you would see a whole different kind of maniacal.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because he actually addressed that in an interview. Nicolas Cage did.
Well, please share.
Basically says it's a bit of a twist here because most people would expect me to play the Robert Hansen role instead of the police role. And he said once I knew John Cusack was involved with it, he says I knew he was the right guy for it.
He does look like him, for sure. I mean, he does look like him.
Yeah, and I think he pulls off that weird, quiet intensity more than Nicolas Cage would.
Yeah, there's no quiet intensity about Nicolas Cage. It's like, is John subtle? No, he's not.
Yeah, no, he's not. But it was a nice restrained performance from him, which I liked. And Cusack, I think, does a good enough job, and I think he would have really rose to the occasion. I don't think they give him enough to do, and that's probably because, as you were talking about, they want to portray the victims. Right.
They didn't want to get into the why is he the way he is. He's a horrible person, and we don't
care
that to be confused at all. We don't care what got him to this point. The fact is he's doing this. And, to the Floathy, to his credit, I mean, he was one of the ones that pushed to have the Jack Halcombe role, the name change and stuff. And Nicolas Cage was wanting to kind of take it as more of a nod to all the troopers, not just him. And so him and Cage and Floathy worked together on that role because he said he wanted to give all the troopers justice, because unlike a place like Detroit or Tampa or LA, whatever, you could walk up on a routine traffic stop out in the middle of nowhere and everybody's got a gun. And there's a huge drinking and drug problem up there. So you never know what you're walking up on, and you could be shot in the middle of nowhere and there's nobody to save you. So he says, and they deal with that stuff every day. And so it was kind of an amalgamation of all the troopers, and Floathy wanted to make sure that the Cindy Paulson role was more about what she was, the hero versus him. He didn't want to take away from that.
What I don't get, all of that is the right call. Everything you're saying is the right call for how to approach the story. So then why do you add this stupid third act where you have this hitman coming to get... None of that happened. For people wondering, the whole portion of the story where he hires a hitman for 10 grand or whatever to go after her and kill her, and then they have the exciting tension at the end where he's like, put the gun down, the guy gets shot, or gets away, whatever. None of that happened. None of that is real. So why did he make that choice if he's going to stay so true to events in respect to everything else? I just don't understand that.
Probably just had to have a filler.
So I was like, God, they were really faithful to the story here up until then. And the only thing I can think of is like some Hollywood executive said, hey, could we spice this up a little bit? Could we do...
let's throw a pimp in there.
Let's throw a pimp with like greasy hair.
50 Cent with a horrible wig. Let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Right. Now, he is also listed as one of the producers. So was that his way of getting a role? Like, hey, look, I'll sign on to help out with this, but you got to put me in the movie somehow. Or was that the trade-off for, hey, look, we need a pimp. Do you want to play a pimp? And no. How about we make you a producer? Okay.
Don't know the answer there.
I mean, which way?
What it does is like that entire side plot pulls away from everything else. It just makes the movie, whenever people are going to complain about the movie, that's what they're going to complain about because it's silly. It's just ridiculous.
It may as well have been like Aliens or something else because it's that far removed from all the other stuff that happened.
It suddenly becomes like what was that movie in the 80s where she's a something by day and a stripper or a hooker at night? Angel. It's just like that whole movie from the 80s where, now she's avenging Angel. Like, stick to the story. The woman has enough story as the hero she already is to cover this base, to make this an entertaining film. You do not need any of this. This is just ridiculous. That bugged me. It just bugged me. And I had, like, as soon as it's happening, I'm like, okay, now I'm lost. How much of this is really true and how much is not? Because I can't imagine any of this is accurate. This just feels like if this happened, this is the wildest sketch of a serial killer I've ever seen. Like, can you imagine Dahmer just, hey man, I need a hitman to take out the one guy got away, the one witness. Can you make this happen? Man, he's an isolated loner. He's a freaking baker in the middle of Alaska. He doesn't know hitman. He doesn't.
The only other reason I can think of as far as why they would add that is because they hadn't hit the story hard enough yet to prove as to why everyone believed Hansen. They, or to what lengths people would go to help him as far as covering up whatever it was he was doing, whether they knew they were covering up for him or not. It adds a little bit more to that level by exaggeration.
How does it add more to that level, though? I don't see how that would add anything to that.
I mean, this guy is like, he goes to this bouncer and is like, hey, I need you to find this girl and I'll pay you 10 grand for it. Okay, great. Why would the bouncer do that if do this thing where it's literally his job to take care of the girls in a strip club? Like, why would he do any of that? It doesn't make any sense.
Why would he?
Right.
None of this makes any sense. I'm not buying that argument. That one doesn't make sense to me.
One of the things I wanted to point out about the movie that, you were talking about how Floathy was working on making sure that Nicolas Cage represented all the troopers, and I mentioned how Greg Baker was, as far as a police officer was concerned, what his role was at the beginning of the case and what he did. I did think it was interesting during the movie, because I had not looked into the case yet before the movie, that he was pointed out and he actually was a real person or a real figure to this case. I like the idea that the movie is kind of tipping their hat to him as far as the steps that he took at the beginning of the case to make sure that this started going down the right path.
Oh, the young trooper that believes in her, that sort of thing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Props to Floathy for putting this whole thing together. And, any guy with that kind of closure rate should be commended on his own. Like he should have had his name in there somewhere. I'm just saying, because that's impressive. That's impressive. Okay, well, we already talked about a lot of the right and wrongs, but did the movie respect the victims? Do you think this was a respectful telling of the story for Cindy Paulson and the people that were murdered at the hands of Robert Hansen?
Look, the goal of making a movie is to make entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But I know Scott Walker, the director, had mentioned he wanted to make this as close to a docudrama as he possibly could. Again, I mean, we've covered the weird change in direction, the weird third act. But generally speaking, I think he did very good justice for everybody involved and really avoided glamorizing Robert Hansen.
That's very true. He really did avoid glamorizing Robert Hansen. I don't feel like Cindy gets painted in a good light through most of the movie. But they do cover her as far as a footnote at the end of the movie where she had gone on to live a normal life. She had 3 kids. What they don't cover is that she has been dealing with a lot of survivor's guilt when it comes to what happened. But yeah, that's really great. So one of the victims I want to bring up real quick is somebody they just discovered or just connected DNA to as recent as 2021. So October 23rd, 2021, they reported that the victim known as Horseshoe Harriet was finally identified through DNA as Robin Pelkey. She's one of the people who weren't mentioned in the movie, but I do want to tip my hat to the fact that they did finally discover to put together a profile for her. Akluta Annie is still unidentified at this point.
All right, what would you have done differently? Me personally, I think the timeline is very muddled and they jump around a lot. They allude to it's 2 weeks until they move, and it really feels like it's longer than that, and then it feels like it's shorter than that, and then it feels like it's years or months. I don't know. I mean, I just feel like the timeline's all over the place. And I also would have taken out the whole subplot where the wife is a complete psychotic, where she kicks this poor girl out into the street in the middle of the night to kick off that stupid subplot. And then she immediately says, hey, and she's the most supportive wife in the world. The next scene, it's just, there's some bad writing there.
Here's a toothbrush for her. I hope she's doing okay.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Yeah. I would have gotten rid of that.
The wife being who she was not fair to her character. And then everything in that third act about the kidnapping and attempted murder, not cool. So I would have gotten rid of those things and made it more of a Silence of the Lambs kind of feel as opposed to this scary, tense moments that they threw in for no good reason.
I would have fleshed out some of the details that I think were just, they did address them, but they addressed them so briefly. If you're really not kind of paying attention, or if somebody doesn't remind you after watching it that they were there, like establishing his position in society versus hers. I think that juxtaposition really wasn't fleshed out very well. Some of those things I think are fairly important, and it really helps paint the picture of not only how just psychologically diabolical this guy is, just evil, but, how trusting we are of somebody just because of their stature in life. And in the timeline, it again, to your point, you don't know if it's been 2 weeks or 5 months, or because all of a sudden there's not much snow on the ground, and then all of a sudden, hey, there's a lot of snow. So it kind of tells you that time, there's a decent amount of time that's passed. But is that 2 weeks? Is that 6 months? It's not so much it jumps around a lot. A lot of speeding up and slowing down, speeding up, slowing down.
It's jarring. That's what it is. It's jarring.
Right. Quit riding the brakes so much. Come on. Jeez.
All right. And with that, we're going to wrap this podcast up. So if you enjoyed Inspired by a True Story, share the show on our social media outlets and give us a review in your favorite podcast app. Pretty please. It really does help. You are the best source of promotion. So tell your true crime maniac friends about it. And thanks for listening to Inspired by a True Story. And Brian, thanks for being on here and telling your story about how even when you meet a serial killer, you don't know that he is one.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
And you're going to join us for the next one too, right? Because Amanda is still out for Hounds of Love.
Yep. Plan on sticking around for that.
All right. Well, we will see everybody in the next episode. That one is called Hounds of Love, and that story is somehow worse. Now let's take off. And remember, let's keep those artists honest.
I'm just fascinated by my own peck pop.
You're the only one. All right.
Like the peck pop I love.
It looks more like a spasm than a flex.
The only one who does that well is someone who looks like Terry Crews. And with all due respect, sir, don't care how much you work out. You do not look like Terry Crews. So stop.
You haven't seen me in nearly a year.
You've made great gains or losses, however you want to, whatever.
I look fantastic
Say
for
that.
my age.
You look very fit for a 70-year-old man.
I probably work out more than Terry Crews.
Shut the fuck up.
Oh my
Jesus
God.
Christ.
Can we save that clip?
Hold on. Let's see how much does Terry Crews work out?
Your 1 hour at Orange Theory doesn't equate to the
I'm
few
there 2
hours
hours
of
a day
iron
now.
pumping.
You are still not equating. Your body doesn't even look like a third of Terry Crews.
That's his moneymaker.
Jesus Christ. What kind of overconfidence are they teaching in this fucking place?
He works out
Jesus
1 to 2
Christ.
hours 4 to 5 times a week. I do that now.
If you believe that, sure. Have you seen his body? I've seen yours. No, you're not comparable. It doesn't mean that you're not progressing, but if you think you look like Terry Crews, your prescription is due.
You're a hurtful man. You know that? You're a hurtful man. I would support you if you started talking about how great you felt.
What kind of funhouse mirrors do you have in your house?
They're the best funhouse mirrors in my house.
Well, John, I appreciate that you would do that, but you're the only friend I have that would support me if I said I look like Terry Crews.
This train hadn't even left the station before it gets off the tracks.